In today's episode, I'm talking to Michael Rilee, the local area director at Young Life, an organization that brings young people together to form deep relationships and learn about Jesus. Now, given that many listeners and young people who go to Young Life are not Christian, we will discuss some of the challenges of being a Christian organization that reaches people from all walks of life. We will also discuss the importance of community and the ways that Young Life has powerfully transformed young people's lives. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts, host of the Givingtown podcast, where we share stories of hope and generosity in Newberg and the surrounding areas. We live in an amazing community full of incredible people who are all working to make Newberg an even better place to live. And this podcast is all about sharing those stories and helping the people in our town be inspired, get involved, and have hope for our future. This podcast is also brought to you by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group, and it's part of our mission to serve this community not only by providing amazing service to our clients, but also to help Newberg be the best place that it possibly can. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere around Newberg, reach out to us. We'd be happy to serve you. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Michael Rilee. All right, Michael, thanks for joining me today on the Givingtown podcast. I'm looking forward to learning personally more about Young Life and sharing the story with our community as well.
Yes. Thanks, Daniel, for having me. We ran into the coffee shop. I think it was at Chapters where we ran into each other this last winter. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how that turned out. I remember I ran into you. Someone mentioned, I think someone kind of knew you and said, "Oh, this is Michael with Young Life." And I'd been thinking for a while. I actually had you on my list. Like, Young Life would be cool to do an interview with. Mm-hmm. And I never quite knew how to reach out. And then you kind of fell in my lap.
Yeah, there we go. Right place, the right time.
Yeah. So a few months later, here we are.
Yes.
So for people who aren't familiar, I think a lot of people have heard of the name Young Life. I think most people, if you say, "Oh, have you heard of Young Life?" they'd say yes. But if you say, "What is Young Life?" I think there'd be a lot of different answers.
Totally.
And most people don't have a full understanding of, okay, what is Young Life? How does it work? I'm sure there's misconceptions about it. So for people who have never heard of it, could you briefly share what Young Life is as an organization?
For sure. Yeah. And it's also funny because in Oregon, it has its own little backstory that we can maybe touch on a little bit, but people know about the Young Life camp that we have because of the old Rajneesh story that goes back to the 80s. But Young Life itself is, we're obviously a nonprofit. It's Christian-based ministry. So part of what makes us unique is we're not represented or necessarily affiliated with one specific church. Our Catholic friends would call us ecumenical. Protestants would be maybe more likely to describe us as interdenominational. So it's largely made up of adults who go to different local churches. And it's also a ministry that's kind of a franchise where it's owned locally. So the Newberg Young Life is made up of people who live in Newberg, who care about Newberg, who want to make Newberg a better place. And our mission statement is to introduce adolescents to Jesus Christ and help them grow in their faith. So that's kind of our mission statement, a little bit how we're composed. And, we do that through a variety of ways. Sometimes people will assume that we're kind of like a youth group, or if they've ever had a church background, they've gone to youth group. We are a little bit distinct in the fact that we, again, not associated with one church, but part of what makes Young Life unique is we go to where kids are, go to where students are. We love to go volunteer at the high schools, the middle schools. At George Fox, we do some volunteering there as well. But it is our belief as we look at Christ's ministry where he went to people. That's why we try to emulate it off that. So he would walk the countryside, go to different villages. So we go to where students are, get to know them. It's a form of evangelism that's really based on earning the right to be heard. So, and it's really interesting because, I've been doing this for, like 20 of the last 24 years. And it's been interesting even as I've evolved as just growing older and more mature, at least I'd like to think so. And you build more and more rapport. It's really interesting the conversations you can have with students and the ways that you can encourage them, and the ways that you can say, "Hey, think about this. Maybe don't do that." As kids tend to get in trouble. I got in trouble as a high schooler, but as you build that trust, you can have some pretty incredible conversations. And it's meant to be like, you're meant to really kind of be, in some ways, like somebody's friend for life or a leader for life. I mean, 2 doors down from where I live is my friend Dom, and I went to Young Life Camp with him back in 2001. But our 6-year-olds, I guess they're both 6 now, they're best little buddies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun, so it's very relational. We do have groups that meet weekly. Sometimes they're more intentional, deeper Bible studies, but most of the times it's a fun environment where we're trying to show that following Jesus is a lot of fun. And we're also trying to share the message of Jesus in a language, in a way that a high schooler today or a middle schooler today can understand.
Yeah. And I do want to learn more about and hear more about kind of what that looks like on a practical level.
Yeah.
I am curious though, because, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure a lot of them are Christian, and I know a lot of them are from other faith backgrounds. A lot of people have had really terrible, backgrounds or experiences with Christians and with the church and want nothing to do with it.
Right.
And so they hear Christian or they hear Christ or Jesus and they're like, oh, okay, I know what that is and I want nothing to do with it. And they might accuse Young Life of saying, well, who are you to tell a kid what to believe or that what they believe is wrong? So how do you respond to that? Because I'm sure you get kids of all different backgrounds and I mean, especially with people who may, the people who really feel rejected by the church a lot of times are trans people or LGBTQ community who may immediately feel like I don't belong here. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, again, back to part of the relational stuff is, that's so crucial no matter what your background is. If you want to have honest conversation, there has to be a level of trust. I think that's, again, part of why we go to where kids are, is we're trying to actually demonstrate that we care about them more as a person than we do about our program. And that really, I mean, that matters a lot. I mean, I went to a freshman baseball game last night. There's not a lot of people watching freshman baseball on a Monday night. But I go there because I'm a Young Life leader trying to build those relationships. And I think that, again, part of what we're trying to do, this is the introduction piece of Jesus, is I think if you take an honest look, yes, Christians have messed it up. Every time you get people involved, things go sideways. You could be a for-profit business that sells real estate, and you're going to have conflict, right?
I've never had conflict.
Never had conflict. Yes. Every time people get involved, organizations and systems get messed up because of people. So of course, Christianity is no exception. And I think that's why for us, we focus so heavily on the person of Jesus Christ. I think one of the things that was really insightful in my early years of training is, somebody said, make Jesus, the focus and the stumbling block, so that don't let people get mad at you for your opinions or your, so we really try to draw out Christ out of the scriptures in a way that, lifts up this really incredible, winsome, brilliant grace and truth. I mean, I think that one of the things I love about Jesus as a person and as a teacher and as God, he had a very, very fair, just measuring stick, and we all fall short of it. So it's like if we, lift up Jesus in a way that brings him to life, and we do it in a way that is compelling, and we do it in a way that's relational. I've not really had a lot of kids reject me or want nothing to do with me. That's not to say we don't have that from time to time, but I think that's part of the earning the right to be heard. I think that's why we, again, lift up, talk about Jesus, as opposed to telling people how to live, and trust that Jesus is compelling enough. And it's certainly a dilemma that people are experiencing, though, with bad histories.
So what are the most common pushbacks you get? You get people in from that, they're like, yeah, F that. And I don't want I don't have anything to do with Jesus. What are the reasons? I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah. But. Well, I love, I joke about this. People call Young Life a cult. At high school, it was, oh, you go to a cult. And I think I totally joke with kids about that, because, I think the other thing, bringing even back to your last question, I think we're not trying to coerce anybody. I think, back to if you could present Jesus in such a way a compelling way, like we try to do, that's bold, that's passionate, it's loving, it's truth. It's all these things. If it's truth, then the person will find it. And it's not up to me to manipulate, coerce. And so we really do try to present him in an invitational way. What I hear more than anything, most often is like, if somebody would say, yeah, I really love this. I mean, I think the most often thing is, I don't know that I need it though. Life's pretty good. And I think that is one of the unique things about where we live. Life is hard for some people, but for some people, like high school kid, he's got his friends, he's got his phone, she's got her phone, like they've maybe got a car or maybe got a job, so I think that more often than not, it's more about, I don't know that I need him. That's, at least for me, that's the most common thing that I've heard in not wanting to follow after Jesus.
That is interesting, because I do hear that same thing too, is like, I just try to be a good person. I live by these values of taking care of people. So what's the need for Jesus? Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's real. Like I think if you look at the globe, I think one of the interesting things about Christianity in of itself, just from like, we have a perspective from the United States that I think is misconstrued as it being like this really white, really dogmatic faith. And if you look at I think it's important to look at Christianity globally, because the Christian faith, the people who claim to follow Christ globally, don't look like you and I. For those of you who don't know me, I'm white. I mean, I have brothers and sisters doing Young Life in Africa. And I have brothers and sisters doing Young Life in China and India and all these other places. And so, those places are where the message of Jesus is being received with the most openness, because they don't have as many things to entertain them. They literally wake up and pray, I hope that I eat today, God. I hope that the places where the Christian message is spreading the fastest is the place where there's the least amount of comfort and there's the most amount of suffering. Yeah. And that's the kind of the contradiction of the United States and Christianity. We have this amazing, even as hard as it is for some people, we have amazing amounts of wealth and comfort and very little as a whole suffering, right? Yeah. So if you're not suffering and you're comfortable, I don't know that I don't know why. I could see why a high schooler says that. So I think that's, and again, the Christian movement as a whole, it's the most diverse movement in the world. Yeah. Made up of every tribe and tongue.
It's interesting you mentioned, and even some of those countries. I think yesterday listening to a podcast, someone said, if you want to listen, or if you want to meet Jesus, like the true Jesus, don't go to the United States, go to China, because I'm pretty sure it's illegal there, isn't it? But people know, if you experience Jesus, and I think that's the thing, is a lot of people hear and learn cognitively, but until you actually experience Jesus, and that doesn't really happen here.
Totally.
So it's an interesting, it's kind of an interesting dilemma, which, we're not here to talk about that, but that is an interesting concept.
Yeah, we could go down some rabbit trails.
I'm sure we could. I don't know if all of our listeners might follow, but maybe off the mic we can have some more conversation about that.
Yep.
So going back to what you were saying is what Young Life actually looks like. So on a tangible level, you're in a high school and you find a student, they're like, well, what is Young Life? I might want to come. Like, what should they expect when they go?
Yep. Yeah. So, if you're a high schooler, what we call Young Life Club. If you show up, I'd like to think that our leaders would be there to make you feel like we care about you. And then that's not just a show. Like when somebody shows up, there are people there to greet them so that they do feel like, oh man, this is a place that I belong. And I've heard that over the years from kids where it's like, that was one of the things I went there and somebody came and talked to me and I felt like I belonged there. So, we do play music. It depends on the club because part of it is based on your talent. But a lot of times our music, it's going to be what a kid's going to hear on the radio. We're not going to play just anything, but a lot of times we will play secular music at a Young Life club. And part of the reason we do that, we're intentional about what songs we choose, but We want the kid who would never step foot in a local church to be able to feel like when they maybe reluctantly came to Young Life that night and they heard a song or sang along with a song, they all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'll give this a chance. And then we're going to have some sort of mixer. Sometimes they might be called icebreakers, but we want one of the things that's so clear in what we're seeing in adolescence today is technology is continuing to isolate students. And it's certainly true of adults too. The isolation, that's been going on really. I mean, I don't know if you know Jean Twenge, but she's got some really interesting research out of San Diego State University about the trends that we've seen since the iPhone went from the minority device to not the iPhone, really the smartphone, to the majority. And we see continual rises of anxiety and depression, self-harm and isolation. And so the mixer is really designed, we want you to have a human interaction.
Yeah.
You know, we want you to do something where you got a little bit out of your comfort zone and had it. There will be nothing that will replace the human interaction, that human sincere. So we're going to have that. We might do a skit up front where Young Life's known for its humor. Oftentimes we get a bad rap because Young Life's, it's just fun. They're not serious. Well, yeah, we want to have fun because laughter has this amazing ability to cure us. I mean, if you remember the movie Patch Adams back in the 90s, and this doctor who would make kids laugh in the cancer ward, like there's something good about laughter that settles the soul. And so we're going to do all that as we lead up to, we're going to finish. We'll do some other things, a raffle. We'll do some other fun things, but we're trying to create an environment where at the very end of the night, we're going to share 10 to 15 minutes out of the Gospels, and we're going to share about Jesus. And we're going to tell you the story of Jesus, again, in a way that a kid's going to understand. And then afterwards, we might go to Dairy Queen, or we might go to, someplace else where we can hang out and continue that conversation. So on a weekly basis, high school and middle school will look very similar to that. Although I will say, we're also seeing changes in adolescence that, we're going back and forth on what the structure looks like. It's interesting. Me and my other colleagues across the country. But for the most part, we want it to be highly relational, where kids can connect. And then of course the Christ part of it. And then, we can do our summer camping. We talked about this earlier, but this summer, all of our high schoolers, right now I was just looking at this morning, is we have 62 high schoolers going, I think is what it is, 61 high schoolers that'll be going up to Canada to a place that we call Malibu, which that's a fun backstory because the guy who built it in the 30s called it Malibu because he wanted to attract the Hollywood stars. Eventually gave the camp to Young Life. But our students are going to drive all the way up there on a school bus, or not a school bus, a charter bus. Although I have done a school bus, a charter bus. There's ferries involved. It's an epic. And then you get there for 6 days, but you come with the leaders that you've gotten to know all year. Again, highly relational. So you're going to go with somebody with a group that you know, which creates great depth. And what's interesting is you put kids in a cabin who were at odds. And then as they begin to reveal,
is that an actual strategy? You put kids together?
Well, we're not strategizing. A lot of times we break it on age group. So let's say we have a group of freshmen in one cabin, and they would not necessarily feel that like, I don't know that I really want to share with this. I don't know that I trust this person. But as each of them becomes more and more vulnerable, and all of a sudden they start to realize, oh my gosh, we have a lot in common. Yeah. There's some really, really sweet, good friendships that come out of it. I mean, Brene Brown and all of her work about vulnerability and what that does, as you say, me too, to the depth of relationships. So It's a really fun, those are just some of the kid parts of it. It's a great thing.
It kind of makes me miss high school and wish I'd had youth groups that I'd gone to. I never actually was involved in Young Life. Oh, I'm sure I would have loved it. It's interesting you mentioned the part about like with the iPhone, and I don't know if I've actually heard it called this, but I like alliteration, and it makes me, the word I think of is counterfeit connection. And I don't know, I'm sure that probably someone's written a book called that. It's an interesting thought of the more connected we think we are, like with social media, and even like VR headsets, like it can feel like you're there. And I feel like that's better than maybe texting, but it just makes me wonder, like, where's society going for young people who they're being thrust into the middle of the greatest technological revolution in history.
Yeah.
And they're kind of in the middle of it, and they're going to be the ones to have to figure out. I mean, we all will, but especially at the really formative times of middle school and high school, it makes me wonder, like, what's this going to look like?
Yep.
And I guess it also shows the value of something like Young Life, or, hey, put your phones away.
Yep.
Let's actually talk to a real person here.
Yeah. What's interesting, when we go to camp, we have kids turn their phones in, put them in a tote, lock them in a closet. And I always like to joke, if you bring 50 kids to high school camp, you've got about $50,000 worth of hardware in this little, they're crazy expensive. But what's interesting is, as by day 2 and day 3, they've forgotten the device. And we don't have internet at the place, so they can't use it. But we also want them to not have music to like kind of to fill that the void of silence. I think silence is good for us.
Yeah,
we're forced to think deeply, and we're forced to contemplate and ponder. And then by the end of the week at camp, anyway, as kids have done this, and they're relating to each other, and they're feasting on authentic relationships. And they start. I've heard this. I hear this every year. Mike, I don't know if I want my phone back. I really don't know. So it's really interesting. You begin to scratch this itch or within them as we pull that device away from them, and they begin to experience the fullness of what life looked like before we had phones, and they really like it. But then when we get back on that bus and we start driving back, and they begin to ask for it, you can watch them go back and forth.
The withdrawals.
Do I want this thing back in my hand? Because I've experienced something different. I don't know that I want it. And inevitably, most of them do end up using it. But yeah, I think it's a real dilemma. And it's part of why high schoolers, middle schoolers, they're struggling with mental health. And I mean, we as adults, if we're honest, if we look at our screen report, we use it too much, and our frontal lobe's fully formed, I think, for the most part.
Well, that's kind of it's designed to be an addiction, and it's a very subtle addiction because fentanyl, for example, it's like you take fentanyl of any amount, that's not good. And so it's just some things are easier to completely stay away from.
Yep.
Whereas a phone, like there's an element kind of like with food, like you need it.
Yep.
And at what point are you an addict?
Yep.
Versus just a casual user?
Yeah.
Which I guess is with any recreational drug or drinking or whatever. And there's billions of dollars to keep us there. So it is. Yes. That's an interesting. I've thought a lot about that as I scroll through my phone researching.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, I think that's part of how we present Jesus, part of our message, part of why we're so big on camp and different experiences. We're hoping that if you said counterfeit, what did you say? You said counterfeit connection. So as we present the real thing, hopefully as their soul experiences not counterfeit but authentic connection, that becomes something that they begin to pursue. And I think one of the paradigm shifts I heard from a guy 10, 12 years ago, he said, do you know how the Secret Service spot counterfeit bills? And my answer was actually, they study counterfeits. He says, no, they study the real bill. And as they know the real thing more and more, they begin to spot counterfeits easier. And I think that's true of why we focus on Christ. We want the real thing. And then also with relationships, you're up against a tidal wave of phone usage and apps, and it's hard to break through that, but doesn't mean you don't try.
Yeah. So what, you kind of answered this already, but what do you think is the main thing that sets Young Life apart from other camps or youth groups?
Yeah. I think like the going part I mentioned earlier, but I think the other thing that we really pride ourselves on as Young Life leaders is we're team-based. My title is Area Director. I oversee Yamhill County, and we have 4 different Young Life expressions in McMinnville, about to start a 5th. And we have 4 different expressions in Newburgh. And so I oversee 9 different flavors of Young Life, so to speak, in the county. I'm directing those, but I'm not I'm only really involved in one of those on the boots on the ground. So a lot of my role is to help empower other people, to empower teams to really make it. And I think a lot of times within the classic youth group style or classic church style, or maybe not even that, but a lot of times people, it's the power of one charismatic person or one paid person. And we're really volunteer based. Like, we're only as strong as the people who support us locally, whether it's leaders who are there or our local committee or people who give. And so we try to base it on a team. And we try to base it on that we're going to kids. We're not waiting for them to show up. And that usually is a little bit different. Most people that I know, they kind of want to do their own thing, and we're asking people to give up 10 hours of their week to go to the high school, to help run a Young Life club, to maybe lead a Bible study, go out to have a cup of coffee with a student. So the cost is high, but I mean, it's worth it. I don't think anybody would, I don't know that you could, I'd be curious if somebody could, in a compelling way, argue that high schoolers and middle schoolers are thriving as a general whole, like that things are better now for them than they were 15, 20, or 30 years ago. I'm not convinced, but maybe somebody could convince me. I don't want to say like we're all going to hell in a handbasket either, because there's a tremendous amount of hope in this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good things going on that I get to see on a regular basis. But if we don't go and try and make a difference.
The one positive I guess I could see is there's such, like you said, a craving. Like Young Life, for example, could be one of the only places someone experiences that kind of connection. Yeah. Whereas maybe in the past, before phones, everything was connection. Whereas like if I know that Young Life is the only place where I'm going to have true vulnerable connection, and you begin to realize like, wow, like those people actually care about me there. And, all these people I'm looking at TikTok or Instagram or whatever, social media platforms are like, I don't think they actually care about me, and I'm just looking at my screen. So I think that could be one side of it, is there's really a need. And I think when people experience it, they're like, wow, this is a whole different way. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to me is that people have grown up and never known anything different. Yeah. For us, we grew up before phones were really that popular, but I don't know if I've really thought much about like, what is it like to never know life without smartphones and iPads? And, you're kind of just born into addiction, I guess. Yeah. So why do you think Young Life is so important for Newburgh? I know we touched on that, but I have the question written down, so I'm going to ask.
I think it's a great question. I mean, again, I think, it's clearly the future of Newburgh and the future of really anywhere it's your youth. Like, they are going to be the ones that are going to be running the show. They're going to be the ones that are running the local businesses. They're going to be the ones in office. Those are the people who are going to be serving in their community. And again, I just go back to some of the statistics about how isolated and vulnerable
do you have any of those off the top of your head?
I thought about that this morning. I know I'm going to say some of these generalities, but I don't have them off the top of my head. I have only one, but as I mentioned, Jean, I think it's pronounced Twangy. It's TWENGE. She's got some TED Talks that I've watched, but they're about 5 or 6 years old now. This was pre-COVID. But I just think as we look at learning losses that we've seen over the last few years, I mean, I know kids who spend 16 hours a day on their phone. I mean, all those things have downstream effects when it comes to kids, even their attention span and their ability to think and these different things. So that doesn't even count some of the mental health crises, but we get to step into that, and we get a chance to walk with students in the midst of all that. And there are other people doing it, and it's important. And we're part of that.
Wow. 16 hours.
Dude, I did not
get past that.
Yeah. Now that one 16 hours that was during COVID, when kids were home.
I guess that makes sense if you have to even do it for school, but still that's kind of insane.
I took a class last year. They said that after 2 hours, or no, it wasn't a class. It was a book that I was reading. After 2 hours, your risk of depression grows exponentially.
Like after being on your phone 2 hours.
2 hours screen time. Which is something that I have to consider when I look at my screen. Or Sunday morning, I have an iPhone, so every Sunday morning I get a screen report around 9 a.m. Yeah. And I go, oh, geez, okay.
I'm at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know I want to get back to this story of actually how Young Life started. I think you were going into it.
Oh, yeah. Well, so go back to the mid-30s. I think the accurate description is in the mid-30s. The Young Life started in Texas, Gainesville, Texas. A guy named Jim Rayburn. But before Jim Rayburn started his work with Young Life, there were these ladies across from this high school that would pray every day. And it was in 1939 that Jim Rayburn, who founded Young Life, he was a seminary student at Dallas Theological Seminary, and he was at a little Presbyterian church. And his pastor was asking him about the high school, and Jim was talking about not enough kids come to church, and not enough kids are, and the pastors.
This was in the 1930s.
In the 1930s, yeah. Even then, high schoolers not necessarily want to go to church, and so the pastor said, "Hey, I want you to go to them." And Jim said, "Well, what are you going to do with the people in the church when they don't like the kids that I start bringing to church?" And the pastor said, "Well, let me deal with that. You just go out there and you go where kids are." And so he started doing that from that little Presbyterian church just outside of Dallas, Texas in the 1939. Young Life was incorporated in 41. And then, it's kind of spread. I'm trying to think. We were just at a conference a couple months ago, and they told us, I think it was 110 countries that Young Life is operating in across the globe. Actually, one of my favorite moments, again, I get back to Christianity as a whole is the most diverse movement in ideological way of thinking in the world. It's pretty moving to be in a room of 110 or of 6,000 people from 110 different countries represented there.
Yeah.
And you start to realize, wow, there's a lot. And actually what's interesting is not everybody could come because of certain governments that they're doing ministry and not allowing them to leave their country. But it's expanded from, it was very camping based in the 1940s. Okay. There's 3 camps in Colorado. There's one in Minnesota and Michigan and Florida, and we've got some in Oregon. I mean, it's become camping based, and I think camping is a little bit of a what's the word I'm like? It should be called resort based. Really, they're
so they're not like intense.
No. You show up and you've got a bed that's been made. The one that we take our middle schoolers to called Creekside. It's a water park that was designed by a Disney theme park designer, and It's got kind of a minor theme. It's a remarkable experience for middle schoolers, which is where the old Rashnish prom was. But yeah, I mean, it's been going since
I've been down there. The one at
in Antelope.
Horse, was it?
It was called Wild Horse Canyon.
Wild Horse Canyon.
Yep.
That's nice.
It's amazing. Yeah, and then Dennis and Phyllis Washington out of Montana. They were the ones that bought the land after the Rashnish. Okay. And then eventually they donated it to Young Life. And over the years, not only have they donated, but they've written really large checks. Okay. So it was renamed it was a Wild Horse Canyon. Now it's Washington Family Ranch. So, okay. Remarkable place. Right. And Young Life in Yamhill County has been going since the early 60s. Wow. And the best I can tell in the history of Newburgh, there was an expression in the mid, like 83, 84, 85. And then when those students graduated from George Fox, it kind of went dormant for a while. Okay. And then in 91, 92, somewhere around there, there's a group of George Fox students that got it started again. Okay. And so it's been going consistently since about 91, 92 here in Newburgh. I just pulled up some statistics. So it looks like about 350,000 kids are involved weekly, and that was the 2018 stats. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like 2018, so we're 6 years past, we've gone through COVID. Do you feel like numbers are higher or lower now? Yeah, it's, I know. I mean, granted, you can only account for Newburgh. No, we've got national statistics that they're way lower right now than they were pre-COVID. But I think there's other things that have gone on with kids have more entertainment options, certainly things that they can do. So what was interesting is coming out of the pandemic was I had to accept the fact that, because this doesn't make sense to me, even though I witnessed it, and I had to really think about it and accept the fact that students, adolescents, to go to a bigger gathering because they've been so isolated, it actually took courage.
Yeah.
They had to muster up enough courage because of their anxiety to be in a space where they might be a little bit vulnerable, and they might not, there's just enough risk in their mind. And so, but then, I know in Newberg and McMinnville, we are about, as far as weekly numbers, we're about where we were pre-pandemic. But part of that is you're just like any organization, your ministry or your product or your service is only as healthy as the people who do it. So if the health of the people is healthy, then the service or the ministry is going to be healthier. And so I think that's part of why we see across, what it was the last 4 years were not healthy times for people.
Yeah.
So as we come out, on the other side of that, I know at least locally we're where we were, and in some respects bigger.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people were very, like, even adults, like, getting back into a large gathering was challenging. Yep. But I can only imagine, like, the ages of like 12, really even like from 10 to like 15.
Yep.
Having like 2 or 3 years where like your brain and your social, like everything is forming. Yep. Like to go through all of that, it's, that's a pretty big chunk of your life at that age. So I imagine it would be tough.
Well, I don't think most people want to think back to how awkward you were as a middle schooler or I was as a middle schooler. Like, you just want to block that memory out.
Pretty bad.
But like, you just forget, sometimes you forget how, when you're going through puberty and adolescence, just how awkward you are. You're trying to figure things out. But yeah, in the midst of all that, I think the other thing that I've seen this in Young Life, but I've seen it as I talk to, like, for example, certain park and recs that they're looking for coaches. There's been a decline in volunteerism that's been going on pre-COVID, as we look across the country and look at different service, like the traditional Lions clubs and Rotaries and Kiwanis. If we look across the country, a lot of places have seen those stop. I know in McMinnville there used to be 2, now there's 1, and it's true. Well, now that's true with Young Life, is like we're volunteer oriented. Same thing. And we see it, I think we see it in the private sector, in the marketplace, when it comes to finding employees. There's just something much bigger going on when it comes to people getting out and either serving or working. And so that's why I say the numbers are down across the country in Young Life. But there's a lot of other things that you can extrapolate from just that one idea. Yeah,
that's interesting. We're dealing with the same thing in our New and Rotary Club, that the numbers have been down. And now that I think about it, yeah, that's probably a whole separate podcast.
There is, yeah, that is. It's tough. Volunteerism and citizenry and people being proud of where they're from, all it's way down. And so if you're not proud of where you're from, or you're not excited to be a part of the solution, you just see a problem.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious if you have a story of, like, any particular young person. I mean, obviously keeping privacy, but like a story of someone who really was transformed by Young Life.
Yeah, I read that question. I went over in my head, because having done this long enough, there's quite a few. There's 2 that come to mind. One was a little bit more drastic. There's this group of boys. They were friends in 7th grade years ago. And I remember going to the middle school. I'd gotten to hang out with them, and they were big troublemakers in the school. They really were. I showed up with Little Caesars pizzas, $5 pizzas, back before they'd raised their prices, and for inflation. And I went to go bring them the pizza, and they came storming into the office, and the principal was pretty upset because they made a huge scene. They were really loud, and they already had this reputation of being troublemakers. And so I handed them pizza. I went and apologized to the principal. I said, I'm sorry, that's my fault. Don't blame it on them. They're just excited to see me, and he knew who I was. And he said, so are you hanging out with these kids? I said, yeah. I said, that one, he's going to camp with me this year. He goes, he's going to camp with you? He's going to camp with you? I said, yeah. He goes, if you can reach that kid, you're going to make my job as a principal a lot easier because he's always getting in trouble. I mean, he was the kind of kid that would swear at a teacher, walk out of the classroom, and just, he just walked the halls. And he kind of played both middles against the end at home as he lived with his parents. They lived in a little apartment, but then he had an older sister. So when he'd get mad at his parents, he'd go live with his sister. When his sister would get tired of him, he'd go live with his parents. So he always got what he wants. So he didn't like being told no at the schools. He didn't like being told to get something done. He had a lot of turmoil going on the inside, and had a chance to bring him to high school, not high school, the middle school camp.
How did you get him to go to camp?
Creekside. Well, I mean, again, that part of that building that relationship, and some of his buddies were going. That makes a difference. Okay. When you ask a high school or middle schooler about going to camp, or you tell them you'd like to come look at this camp, this is awesome, show them the YouTube video or whatever, usually they'll want to, well, who's going? So some of his buddies had already said yes. And one of the other students that's a part of this group is one of my favorite of all the years I've done Young Life. I actually just hung out with him last week. He's on spring break from the U of O. I was his brother's Young Life leader. So my one friend who's down at U of O is going, and then his friend says yes, who's the biggest troublemaker. Goes the very first night, he tried to sneak out of the cabin, but I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I heard the door creak and closed the door. He jumped back in bed. And that was right after his 7th grade year. He had a really meaningful experience. And then 8th grade, he went back. And then it was his freshman year when they shut COVID down they shut the schools down because of the response to COVID. And his freshman year, he was already online school when the schools shut down because of his truancy, because of how poorly his grades were. He had found out some stuff that going on inside his family that was really, really catastrophic, and he couldn't make sense of it. He already knew the dysfunction within his family, but when he heard like the root of the story of this is why everything is the way it is, he couldn't handle it. So he actually was already online school. So during COVID, we didn't have much connection.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to the end of his junior year, he came to one of our last Young Life clubs, and we do this big paint war. We use Crayola paint that you would use in kindergarten to paint, the washable kind, and we use the powder kind. It's absolute chaos. It's fun. He came to that, and afterwards he came up to me and he said, "Man, it's been so long." And I said, "How you doing?" And he says, "Is there still a camp? Is there any room at camp?" I said, "Man, I'd love to have you come." So he came, and it really hit him hard, the story of Jesus, and there were some connections made there as he was really, really angry with what had happened. And he began to feel a sense of relief knowing that Christ is available to him as he can find hope in the midst of his life. And so he gave his life to Christ. And then his senior year, we began to meet regularly to go through the Bible and read the Gospel of John together. And he's one of my favorite stories. He's actually down visiting his family right now in Mexico, and he's going to come back here in a couple of weeks, and he's kind of figuring out what he wants to do next with his life. But he and this other friend are some of my favorites. And I'm hopeful that both of them, because hopefully they'll both come back and continue to give back in the way that they received through this. And there's been a lot of stories of that. One of the guys that's on staff in McMinnville that's leading our college ministry, I took him to camp when he was a 8th grader, and now he's got a family and kids, and he's really active in this local church. And again, if you do it long enough, I'm only 42, but you do it long enough, and you start to see like the second generation of change. There's a lot to be hopeful for.
Yeah, there really is. One of the things you mentioned how Young Life reaches students where they're at.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people could do better. I mean, as a part of the Christian, and, some people, even the word Christian doesn't, to me, Christian used to mean like, oh, follower of Jesus, disciple of Jesus.
Yeah.
But Christian can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. I found there's like 11 different cultural meanings that it has. So I kind of avoid that word just because
right.
It doesn't mean what I think it means to everyone. But what do you think that people who are followers of Jesus can do better as we relate to our communities?
Yeah, I think I read in John 13, we've got this amazing story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And for those of you who don't know that story, the servant in the house that would wash the guests' feet was the lowest servant. Feet are kind of gross, and in that era when you're walking around and you don't have even shoes are gross, but Jesus, who was God in human form, he was willing to get down on his knees and scrub his disciples' feet. Even Judas was in that room. Judas left after he washed his feet. And then after that, he says, I give you a new commandment. He had given them the greatest commandment was love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, I give you a new commandment. I want you to love the way that I have loved you. And of course, this is right before the cross, before he goes and dies for them. And he says, the world will know that I came by the way that you love each other. And we try and model that within our teams, that a kid shows up to a Young Life club and they watch an interaction between, a guy leader and another guy leader, a guy leader and a girl leader, or whatever it might be. Like, as they look at that interaction, they go, there's something different about that. So I think at a fundamental level, that idea of serving and taking on the lowest form of a servant, but then yes, that ability. I think what's so sad about our society is we've been socially manipulated to be polarized more and more, and we don't love, we don't lean in and engage other people, and I think the way that if we love as Christians, we love the way that Christ loved each other, that will speak volumes. But yeah, I think the other thing that I see is, I can get people to go, if I got up in front of a group of people who call themselves a Christ follower and said, hey, I want to take you on a short-term mission to this country, some other country. It's going to cost you $4,000. We'll go there, we'll fly there, we'll go build a house, or we'll go teach school or something. Those are really fine, noble things. But if I got in front of that, there'd be a lot of people that say yes. But if I got in front of that same group and said, hey, I want to take you on a mission down the street to, in my case, it's the high school, right? I would find a lot fewer people because it's harder on that long-term mission in your community. And I think that's the thing that I would really encourage people who call themselves Christ followers is get to know your neighbor. We hung out with our two neighbors. We have kids about the same age this weekend, and had some really, really good conversations about marriage. And I don't see the world the way that my neighbors and I do, in the sense of like I would call myself a Christ follower, and they wouldn't. But man, we had such a sweet conversation, and I mean, just those things are huge. Getting out and serving your community, not just staying in your little bubble, and not engaging in people's brokenness. I think that would go, those things. I mean, I think that's what Jesus asked us to do. So they're not my ideas, but I think that would go a long ways.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. Well, last question.
Yes.
Obviously you've been in Newburgh and around that area for a while, even though I know you're in McMinnville now.
Yeah. I've been in Yamhill County since 81. My roommates used to make fun of me that I was 99W for life, because I've never lived off a 99W.
So you've been here a long time, your position, Young Life, what gives you hope for the future of Newburgh?
Well, I mean, I think again, back to some of this, you did say it again, you called it counterfeit.
Oh, counterfeit connection.
I think sometimes you have to see the contrast, and have it be obvious. And I think part of that social technology, it's going to leave us wanting. I think wisdom, I think in a lot of ways is discerning the difference between true and almost true, because it's a lot easier to know what's true and what's not true.
Right.
But almost true is harder to tell. And that's where it's challenging for all of us, right? You have to be really, really discerning and thoughtful to figure out, oh, that's true. Well, that's almost true. And I think the future, as we continue to share the message of Christ, in at least in an increasingly post-Christian society, in a post-secular society. I mean, I guess part of what I'm hopeful for is people look around and go, I mean, like when we tell kids about sin in young life, I think it's an aha moment. I don't think you have to convince many people right now that things are broken, that we're broken. You don't have to convince a middle schooler or a high schooler, hey, I don't think this is what it's supposed to be like. And I think that contrast presents a phenomenal opportunity as you can share, the message of Jesus in that contrast. And I think the other thing, at least from my perspective, again, as somebody clearly speaking from a Christ following standpoint, Jesus said, hey, I'm going to build my church. And the gates of Hades are not going to overcome it. And so I think that there's a tremendous amount of hope in knowing that Jesus, he's here, he's active, he's doing things. Yeah. If you want to find all the bad things, man, they're there. They're there. I think that's part of the social manipulation. That's what we get fed in our feeds. That's what news is. That's what they do. There's a lot to be hopeful for with, I know in Yamhill County this summer, we're going to have, by the time it's all said and done, between high school all the way up through college, we'll have close to 200 kids this summer that'll have a chance to have a camp experience. There's a lot of more adolescents in this county, but, I feel like if everybody was doing that, if everybody's really serving kids, that's our future. And so I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
It's been great to get to know you a bit and learn more about Young Life. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.